Welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast, where you'll find insight, analysis, and the story behind the numbers.
Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of BL podcast on State of the Economy. I'm Amiti Sen. Today, we will talk about the EU's recent environment-related measures, specifically the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism and the EU deforestation regulation and its impact on Indian exports. While these measures are ostensibly to curb emissions and protect the environment, there is a fear that these may end up being non-tariff barriers for imports. Not only is the application of these measures complicated, but there are many fuzzy areas that the EU is yet to clarify. I have with me today Mr. Ajay Srivastava, former Indian Trade Services Officer and founder of research body Global Trade Research Initiative, who has extensively analyzed both the regulations. Mr. Srivastava today will help us to understand a bit more about the issues at hand. Mr. Srivastava, welcome to BL Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Okay, so can you please explain what the CBAM actually is and why is the EU bringing in this measure? I mean, protecting the environment is high on everybody's agenda, but why bring in a measure that, includes not only its own country and companies, but, the world at large?
Okay. So first, the acronym. CBAM stands for Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So this is a new tax which EU proposes to levy on certain products starting from January 1, 2026. And gradually it will be adding up to the list of products and it will be covering all the possible products by 2034. So the initial list of products mentions steel, aluminium, cement, hydrogen, electricity, and fertiliser. So this is the beginning made by EU, and soon we are hearing that other countries, they are also thinking of imposing the same tax. So UK has floated its draft, and other countries like USA, Canada, and Japan are also talking about these things. Now coming to the second part of your question, that is why. Why EU did this? So it's very interesting. EU has a very ambitious environment agenda. Climate agenda, I must say. So to implement this agenda, EU has a body called emission trading system. Through this emission trading system, EU maps the emissions of more than 10,000 of their top industrial installations and power plants. And they set emission limits, annual emission limits on each of these. If anybody crosses the limits, then they have to pay the penalty. I'll tell you how much the penalty, what the shape of the penalty is. And if anybody does better, then he is rewarded. So entire system is market driven. So EU Parliament doesn't do anything. The way it happens, it's called cap and trade system. So suppose my installation was emitting 100 tons of carbon dioxide every year, and my limit was 98 tons. It was reduced by 2 tons. And so I do investments in clean technologies and I improve my processes and I go below from 100, not to 98, but to 96. 98 was my limit and I go to 96. So I have additional these 2 points, 2 tons of carbon dioxide. I can sell these 2 tons of carbon dioxide worth of certificates. I can trade this at the emission trading system there. So another installation which has not done anything, which could not curtail any of its emissions, they will have to buy this from me. And this buy and sell, demand and supply, it proposes, it sets the price. So current price is about 100 euros per tons of carbon dioxide emitted. Now, this is all very fine. It was going very fine. But while this is all fine, EU was allowing its most polluting sectors, which are those steel, aluminium, paper mills, cement mills, to go scot-free without any improvement on their part. Why? So they said, okay, if you impose such a stiff carbon cost on me through ETS, then we'll shift production to the countries which have lower environmental costs, say China or India or some other countries. So this was termed as carbon leakage. So here we have to understand that carbon leakage was a threat. They say if you impose the price, this carbon leakage will happen. That means we may be shifting to other countries.
Right.
So carbon leakage never happened, but then it was thought that it may happen. But then EU, when it became more ambitious to implement its climate agenda, it could not have allowed its most polluting sectors to go scot-free. So it said it drew a plan through this CBAM regulation. It says, okay, we'll reduce your free allowances every year, year by year. And to help you from cheaper imports, to discourage cheaper imports, will whatever price for carbon you are paying, the similar price will be charging, and on the similar extent on the imports of the same commodities. So CBAM basically was a tax on imports, which EU proposes to take on steel, paper, cement, most polluting sectors. So basically CBAM in one line is to address the possible threat of carbon leakage. It
Right.
was long. I hope it helped.
You have analyzed in details the possible impact of CBAM on Indian exports. Could you share with us, how the measure will impact India? So, what are the items that are likely to get hit? And as per your assessment, what could be the magnitude of export loss once the CBAM is there fully in place?
So EU is our large trading partners. We export more than $77 billion of goods every year to them. Of these goods, about $8.2 billion are covered under the list of products of CBAM, like steel and aluminium. Steel and aluminium, they are the most important products. And we export about $5.2 billion worth of steel every year to EU, $2.7 billion of aluminium products to EU every year. So these two will be the principal products affected immediately. But as I said, EU will be enlarging the list of products gradually. And by 2034, all the products will be covered.
Right. And we are also hearing this date, October 1, 2023. So since, the higher taxes are supposedly they're going to kick in 2026, what is the significance of this October 1, 2023 date? Like what's exactly going to happen as far as CBAM is concerned?
Tax will kick in from January 26, but the process of sharing of emission data with EU counterparts will start on October 1 this year only. And the quarter starting October 1, 1 month before the end of the quarter, the Indian exporters has to share its emission certificate with EU counterpart, and which they have to in turn submit to the EU authorities for this. So the information flow will start from October 1. EU wants to take this 2 years gap to assess the gaps in their system and strengthen the system. It's just for strengthening the system.
Right. So, like October 2023, it is just June now, July, August, like less than four months down the road. So, is our industry in a position to do all this? I mean, is there clarity on what they're supposed to do?
I think major industries they are talking to each other. They are talking to their experts. But so far, the top few industries I know, the top people in steel and aluminium, they had some program even without the CBAM to reduce their carbon content. They had a program, but now CBAM has put a timeline, very stiff timeline. So they are talking to the government, and many task forces have been created, and they are basically evaluating their options, whether they should go for clean energy or they should pay the CBAM with the investment in cleaning the process will justify the profits, and whether the expensive products, which will be the result of the cleaner processes, will justify the processes and trade amount. So I think they are doing processing at various levels, understanding, acting, everything in slightly mixed way.
Right. And, the CBAM measures, when they get implemented, how will the penalty will get calculated? So is there clarity on that?
Full clarity will come maybe this month when EU shows its implementing regulations. But it's like this. From January 26, 1 year before that period, the importer, the EU-based importers, will have to assess from which firm it will import what. And in that assessment, he will have to buy the certificates in advance from the EU authorities. And then at the end of the year, and the next year in May, he has to settle off with this. If he's not settling by May next year of the operations, then the penalties are very stiff. How much will be the quantity, amount of the penalty? I think implementing regulation, we have to wait for that to know that exact amount.
That is still something that is to be spelled out properly by the EU, right?
Yes.
India is also putting in place its own carbon trading mechanism, and it is also reportedly in talks with the EU for recognition of its own carbon certificates. So the EU also assured in its trade policy review, which happened recently at the WTO, that effective carbon price paid outside of the EU will be taken into account while implementing CBAM measures. So do you think it is possible for India to work out such an arrangement with the EU?
My personal views are a big no. 45 countries have implemented carbon trading systems, and our system should conform to the global norms. And I don't expect EU to give any lenience to India if it doesn't meet their requirements.
Oh, really? So, like India hoping that, it could work out something, it might be something that basically might not result in much.
Amiti, you will recall about 2 decades before EU has implemented REACH regulation for chemicals. And we made similar noises and so many meetings were there, but result was nothing. Everybody was made to comply.
Right, right, right. Okay, so the EU is also bringing in a second environment-related legislation. The EU deforestation regulation, which has been adopted by the EU Council already. So, what is that? Like, is it something different? Is it in addition to the CBAM, and how will it affect India?
So I say if CBAM targets industrial products, EU deforestation regulation targets agriculture products. The essence in one line is if you are growing any product on the land which has been deforested after 31st of December 2020, then you cannot export it to the EU. And your certificate is not sufficient for saying this. It has to be proven by an elaborate track and trace mechanism. EU wants the details of the piece of the land, its address, farmer's name, and how it moves from supplier to supplier, from grower to supplier to other supplier, to the exporter to the importer. EU wants the details of entire supply chain. You say, we are talking about not giving digital data to EU. They want to take everything through such mechanisms like CBAM or EUDR. So the second part is which products. Today they started with certain products, and they say they'll be covering most of the agriculture products in due course of time, that is within few years. But today, most affected products from India will be coffee, leather and leather items, and paper products.
Right. And, since agriculture is also mostly unorganized in the country, so wouldn't it be that much difficult to gather so much data from, small farmers?
It will make almost impossible for small exporters to operate in the area. The area will be left only to not big but very big people who can afford to put up such a supply chain and trace mechanism, farm to fork mechanisms, all these things. So small exporters, my personal view is that they cannot afford to export to EU. And I'll be happy to be proven wrong in some time.
Right. So these all seem to be, unilateral measures, like all coming from EU. So will they pass muster at the WTO? Because, if India raises a dispute at the WTO, so how strong can be a case that can be built against the EU for these measures?
So two precise observations. First, for CBAM is that WTO rules, they talk about the product per se, not how it is made. And EU CBAM charges differential taxes based on how it is made, how much emissions was there. So even if the steel of the same quality, people from different installations may end up paying different tax because cleaner steel may have been made from green hydrogen and darker steel may have been made using gray hydrogen. So this is not tenable at the WTO, but WTO, it's almost non-functional. So we cannot wait for the WTO to give justice to us on this. Similarly, EU deforestation regulation, that also it flouts basic WTO understanding because it proposes to classify countries into high-risk country, low-risk country based on their own criteria. WTO does not allow this. So both the regulations, they fall foul. But I don't want to put all my eggs into WTO fight because the way WTO is functioning, no decisions are expected in near future, and we should be ready to the fact that we have to face the CBAM and EUDR things.
Right. So, I know this is a very difficult question, but how do you think the situation can be best handled by the government at the moment?
EU has taken a decision. Now, if we have to trade with EU and similar other countries, because many more are talking about this, we have to prepare. This is the gauntlet thrown at us. And what government can do? Government should do what other countries are doing. It's like setting up its own emission trading system and renaming the taxes like customs duties and cesses and excise duties on petroleum products. We charge heavy taxes already. We just need to rename them in a very discreet way as carbon tax. That will lessen the impact there. And then we have to prepare a strong retaliatory measure. Remember when US has imposed during Mr. Trump's time tariffs on aluminium and steel? We retaliated. So similar retaliation has to be there. And then we have to increase industry awareness, especially the small sectors. Then, of course, we have to wait. We should not hurry for the FTA with EU and UK. Unless this is solved, what will happen if we do an FTA with EU today? Their goods will enter at zero duty in India. Our goods will pay 20 to 35% CBAM there. This is not justified. So we have to wait for more clarity till an FTA is signed. FTAs can wait.
So do you think that, India could actually, include these talks in the FTA talks that are already happening with the EU?
No, I don't advise for that because EUDR is separate regulation. Suppose EU wants to help India, of course, it will not. It cannot offer a better treatment to India than it is offering to any other country because then entire regulation can be questioned. So I don't think even if it wants, it can offer any better deal to India. That we should understand very clearly. Bilateral talks, they happen at mostly at, say, a diplomatic level where nice language is talked. But we have to understand very clearly, even if EU wants, they cannot. Because if they help one country, what will they apply to other countries? So I'm very clear that nothing is going to come out of these talks. We have to handle it properly.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Srivastava, for explaining things so lucidly for our listeners. As things are still evolving, we will keep a watch on both the regulations and how the Indian government and industry negotiate these. I hope to have you again soon with us in another episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amiti. Nice talking to you.
Thanks.